The events you're about to see are based on real accounts. To protect the identities of those involved, names and details have been changed. My name is Thomas Collins. I'm 37 years old, and I'm a journalist here in Chicago. I've been working in investigative journalism for over a decade, mostly dealing with corrupt politicians and shady businesses. But there's something I'll never forget, something that has haunted me to this day. It all started after I decided to play a game. Yeah, I know it sounds weird, but bear with me. It was late one night, after finishing up some research on a local corrupt councilman. I had a few hours to kill before the next deadline, so I decided to play a video game. A friend of mine recommended Outlast, a horror survival game. At first, I was skeptical. I mean, horror games weren't really my thing, but this one caught my interest because it was set in an abandoned asylum. I've always been curious about places like that, so I thought, why not? The game starts with you sneaking around a creepy asylum with nothing but a flashlight. Pretty basic stuff, right? But there was something about it, something unsettling, even though I knew it was just a game. The atmosphere was so thick, the noises felt real, and every corner you turned made you feel like something was watching. I was on edge, but I played through it. It wasn't until I reached a certain point that things started to get weird. Around 2 a.m., just after I defeated a particularly difficult part in the game, I started hearing whispers. At first, I thought it was just the sound from the game, maybe some new element they introduced for atmosphere. But then the whispers continued, even after I had paused the game. It wasn't just in my head either. The whispers were clear, almost like someone was right behind me. I turned around, but my apartment was empty, just the usual clutter of paperwork and half-drunk coffee cups scattered around my desk. I brushed it off, thinking it was some trick of the mind. But the whispers didn't stop. They would come and go in intervals, always when I was alone, always at night. I heard a voice calling my name sometimes, other times just faint murmurs. It was like a distant voice, but it was close, almost like it was in the room with me. Over the next few nights, the whispers grew louder. They weren't just whispers anymore. Sometimes it felt like laughter, far off, but distinct. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like they were guiding me somewhere, like I was being pulled towards something. And that's when I started to think that maybe it wasn't just a coincidence. I live in the heart of Chicago, not far from the downtown area. It's a big city, but there are always spots people don't talk about, areas that have been abandoned for years, neglected by everyone. On one of the nights when the laughter was particularly loud, I decided to follow it, just to see if my mind was playing tricks on me. I went out to the outskirts of downtown, the part of the city that's been forgotten by time. The streets were eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your chest. I walked down an alley I had never noticed before, and as I did, the whispers seemed to grow more intense, like they were urging me forward. My heart was racing, and I had this overwhelming feeling that something wasn't right, but curiosity drove me forward. After walking for what felt like an eternity, I came across an old building. It was a decrepit place, clearly abandoned for years, with peeling paint and windows covered in grime. But there was something about it that pulled me in. Without thinking, I entered through a broken door. The interior was even worse, dark and filthy, with only the faintest light coming through cracks in the walls. As I moved deeper into the building, the laughter grew louder, but now it was joined by something else, soft, rhythmic chanting. I followed the sounds down a narrow hallway, the air thick and musty. The further I went, the more intense the chanting became, and then I found it. A room hidden behind a rotting door. Inside was a circle of candles, their light flickering in the dark. There were symbols on the floor, scratched into the wood in what looked like blood. And in the center, a pile of old yellowed papers scattered across the floor. I had no idea what I was looking at, but I knew one thing. It was real. The whispers, the laughter, the chanting, it wasn't just some strange coincidence. This place, whatever it was part of something bigger, something darker. I didn't want to stay any longer, but I had to. I grabbed one of the papers from the floor and rushed out of the building, the whispers following me as I left. I don't remember much after that, just stumbling back to my apartment and locking the door behind me. But when I checked the paper I had grabbed, it was filled with strange symbols and writing, things I couldn't understand. I did some research the next day. It didn't take long to find that this building was part of an old abandoned asylum, one that had been closed down for years. But the strange part was that the symbols I saw on the paper matched those of old occult rituals. And the laughter? Well, apparently, some people believe that the asylum had been the site of dark rituals before it was shut down, that it was never truly abandoned. The whispers, the laughter? It wasn't just me. I don't know what I found that night. I don't know if it was some messed up coincidence or something far worse. But ever since then, I haven't been able to shake the feeling that I'm being watched. And the worst part? The laughter still comes, sometimes when I'm at home alone, sometimes when I'm working late into the night. It feels like it's always there, just behind me. And I still hear the whispers guiding me, pulling me towards something I don't understand. I haven't gone back to the building, but I don't know if that's enough. The thing is, after that night, I can't shake the feeling that it's all connected. Like I've uncovered something, but I'm not sure what it is. I keep asking myself, was it just a game? Or did I really find something? Something worse? My name is Greg. I'm a truck driver in Pennsylvania, and if you've ever heard of the Silent Hill series, you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say I've always been a fan of it. What you probably don't know is that a few months ago, something that happened to me during my trips started to feel like something straight out of that game. The worst part is, to this day I can't explain what I lived through. It was just another regular night, or at least I thought it would be. I was driving along Route 22, passing through some small towns here in rural Pennsylvania. It was about 2 in the morning, and the road was practically empty. Just me and the headlights cutting through the darkness. It was cold, and a thin fog started forming on the horizon, but nothing too concerning. I was used to it. But as I kept going, the fog began to get thicker, until I could barely see past my own headlights. I was halfway through the trip when I started noticing something strange. In the middle of the fog, there were human figures. At first, I thought they were just travelers, or maybe someone in need of help, but there was something very off about them. They weren't moving. I felt uneasy, but I kept driving. In my head, I thought maybe it was just an illusion caused by the fog or a lack of sleep. But as I got closer to them, the figures simply vanished. It wasn't like they moved or stepped away. They just disappeared, as if they were erased from existence. I froze for a second, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I looked in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing. No one on the road. The fog was still thick, but I could swear something was wrong. Something I couldn't understand. Out of instinct, I sped up the truck. The road was empty again, but the feeling that something was watching me didn't go away. I didn't take long to realize that the fog was getting even thicker as I drove. I could barely see anything in front of me. All I could hear was the engine's hum and the headlights cutting through that white mist. Then I saw another figure ahead, standing in the middle of the road. It wasn't a normal person, not by any means. It was standing still, looking down, but its posture was strange, almost as if it wasn't human. As I got closer, it vanished, just like the others. But this one, when it disappeared, left a chill in my spine that I couldn't shake. I didn't know what was happening, but the feeling that something was watching me on that road just grew stronger. Every mile I covered, more figures started to appear. They were scattered along the road, standing still, just waiting, not moving, and every time I got close, they disappeared. I was terrified, not so much by the physical fear, but because I couldn't understand what was going on. I was alone, driving on an empty road with something or someone watching me, only to disappear every time I tried to get closer. I started to feel like these figures were following me, even when I drove past them. The fog seemed to be moving with me, and I could only see what my headlights illuminated directly. The rest of the road was lost in darkness. The tension kept building, and I began to feel a pressure on my chest, as if someone was standing right behind me, watching me closely. I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was terribly wrong. It was like the road had turned into a distorted version of itself, a copy of what I knew, but with a dark, unsettling twist. With every new figure that disappeared, I felt more trapped in something I couldn't control. Desperate, I tried to call someone, but my phone had no signal. The radio was dead too, nothing but static filling the silence. My eyes were glued to the road, but the fog seemed to grow thicker, spreading like it was swallowing everything around me. And then, in an instant, I saw what looked like a figure in the rearview mirror. This time, it didn't disappear. I saw it reflected for a few seconds, standing behind the truck, watching me. My body froze. I didn't know what to do. The feeling of being followed, watched, was so intense that I couldn't think straight anymore. My vision started to blur, not from the fog, but from something else. I could barely breathe. A rising panic took over, but what scared me the most was the feeling that the figures were getting closer, invisible, but still there, as if the very air was becoming heavy. I slammed my foot on the accelerator and, suddenly, the road cleared up. The fog started to dissipate, and the road opened up in front of me as if nothing had happened. The figures, the fog, everything was gone. I breathed a sigh of relief, trying to return to normal, but the feeling that I had experienced something beyond human understanding didn't leave me. I kept driving until I reached my destination, but that road was never the same again. I've passed through there a few times since, but I never saw those figures again, and I never felt that sensation. What happened? I don't know. I know it wasn't a sleep deprivation hallucination. Those figures felt real, and the fear I felt was real. To this day, every time I pass through that road, I wonder, are they still waiting for me, out there in the fog? My name is Bradley Turner. I'm 29 years old, and I live in Columbus, Ohio. I work as a night security guard at a pizzeria called Tony's Pizza Palace. I never thought I'd be here writing a story like this, but after what happened, I feel like I need to share it. Maybe someone has gone through something similar or can explain what's happening, because I'm really starting to question my sanity. It all started about 2 weeks ago, and since then, I can't look at that pizzeria the same way. I've always been a bit of a horror game junkie, especially after I started playing Five Nights at Freddy's during my days off. That game messed with me in ways I didn't expect, you know? Being locked in a dark place surrounded by creepy animatronics, trying to survive. It gave me a wild adrenaline rush, but I never took it too seriously. It was just a game. But after playing it for several late nights, I started feeling a strange paranoia at work. Maybe it was just in my head, but the pizzeria started giving me the chills for no reason. The pizzeria is pretty old, one of those places that has seen better days. The animatronics are different from the ones in the game, of course, but they're still pretty creepy. There's a bear that plays the guitar, a pirate fox with an eye patch, and a bird holding a tray. They all stay on stage during the day, but at night, they get turned off and just stand there, collecting dust. I always thought it was kind of depressing, seeing those things, their fabric faded, as if they were always waiting for something. But I never really thought much of it until things started going wrong. On the first weird night, I was doing my usual round around 2 a.m. Everything was quiet, and I was checking the security cameras in the back room. Suddenly, I heard a metal sound coming from the main hall. My heart skipped a beat, but I thought maybe it was just some wiring issue or something falling. When I went to check, there was nothing out of place. I looked at the animatronics just to be sure, and they were exactly where they always were, on the stage, motionless. I took one last glance and went back to the room, trying to convince myself that I was just getting paranoid from playing the game. But that wasn't an isolated case. Over the next few nights, the noises kept happening. Sometimes it was banging, other times it sounded like a creak as if someone was dragging a chair. I became more aware of the cameras, but I never saw anything move. Then one night I noticed that the bear was turned slightly to the left. It was subtle, but I knew it was always facing forward. I stared at it, trying to convince myself that maybe someone had moved it during the day, and I just hadn't noticed. The situation got even weirder on the following shift. During my round, I walked past the stage and swear I heard a faint click, like a mechanical snap. I walked over slowly, my heart racing, and when I got closer, the bear had its head slightly lowered, like it was staring at me. It gave me the chills, and I took a step back, almost tripping over myself. I checked the system to make sure everything was turned off, and it was. I didn't know if I was losing it or if something was really happening. The final straw came on the last night I worked there. I was already really suspicious of everything and paying attention to every little detail. Around 3 a.m., while I was reviewing the cameras, I noticed the pirate fox wasn't on stage. I froze. I rewound the footage, and at some point between a camera switch, it was just gone. I rushed down the hallway with my flashlight in hand and went straight to the main hall. When I got there, the fox was in the middle of the hallway, tipped to the side as if it had fallen or been dragged. I was paralyzed, trying to understand how that was possible. The thing was heavy. I'd helped move it before during maintenance. There was no way it could move on its own. I dragged it back to its spot and taped it down just to make sure it wouldn't move again. But the creepiest part came after that. When I went back to the room and looked at the cameras, the bird had its arm raised, pointing down the hallway. I almost quit right then and there. That night, after all of that, I started noticing that small things were missing. My flashlight, a pen, even my badge that I always left on the desk. At first I thought it was just me being distracted, but then I found some of those things in absurd places, like on the stage or in the play area. It was like someone was messing with me. I never saw anyone, but I knew I wasn't alone. I searched online for other people who had worked there before, but I couldn't find anything similar. The manager just laughed when I mentioned it, telling me I must have been playing too much Five Nights at Freddy's. Maybe he was right. But I can't shake the feeling of how those animatronics seemed alive. I asked to switch my shift to the daytime, and thankfully, they agreed. Even now, when I pass by the pizzeria during the day to pick up my paycheck, I get the feeling the figures are watching me. Sometimes, I even think I hear those same clicks and creaks, but I pretend I don't notice. I haven't played Five Nights at Freddy's since, and I've been avoiding anything to do with animatronics. I know it sounds crazy, but it felt real to me. And even now, after all this time, I wonder if it was just my mind playing tricks or if something really was wrong with that place. My name is Lisa Thompson. I'm 32 years old and I live in New York. I'm not a professional photographer, but I've always had an interest in photography. I used to roam the streets of the city, capturing everyday moments and exploring new places, just for fun. I never thought something as simple as a camera could lead me to an experience that still makes me question my sanity. This happened about 6 months ago, and to this day, the images still haunt me. I had just finished playing a horror game called Fatal Frame. I'm not much of a gamer, but the storyline caught my attention, and since I always liked creepy stuff, I decided to give it a try. I wasn't expecting it to affect me as much as it did. The hours I spent playing got so intense that, in a way, I couldn't separate the game from my reality. I kept remembering the images of ghosts and the eerie atmospheres from the game, but I thought it was just my imagination. It all started on a rainy afternoon. I was home, camera in hand, thinking about how I could capture something interesting in the middle of that storm. I'm one of those people who can find beauty in the most mundane things, so I decided to go out into the rain and take some pictures of the city, even with the gloomy weather. What happened next is something I still can't explain properly. When I reviewed the photos later, my breath caught in my throat. What was supposed to be simple pictures of buildings and empty streets started to show distorted figures. At first, I thought it was some technical issue with the camera. I was in a dimly lit place, and maybe the lens was dirty or the flash had malfunctioned. But then I looked closer. In one of the pictures, there was a woman's face. She was in profile, eyes closed, and what freaked me out was the expression of agony on her face. It wasn't a blurry or distorted image due to technical error. It was like she was actually there, somewhere, watching the scene. But the creepiest part was that I didn't remember anyone being there when I took the photo. I was alone on the street, just me and the rain. At first I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just a coincidence. But as I took more pictures, the figures kept appearing more often. Each time I looked at the images, they became clearer and more disturbing. Distorted faces, wide open eyes, expressions of terror. I even took photos of my own reflection in the mirror, hoping to find something normal. But in every picture, something was out of place. The figures began showing up, almost as if they were behind me, somewhere I couldn't see while I was taking the photo. I didn't tell anyone at first because it seemed insane. How could anyone believe that ghostly figures were showing up in my photos? I even thought I was becoming paranoid. But as the images piled up, I felt more and more uneasy. I even tried changing locations, leaving the city for a few days, but it didn't help. When I looked at the photos I took, those figures were still there, like something or someone was following me, materializing with every click. I started to feel watched, even when no one was around. At night, I would stare at the photos and wonder how all this could have happened. I knew I was becoming more disconnected from reality. I tried to understand what was going on, but the answers never came. The strangest part was that in one of the most intense moments, one of the images showed a figure with the same expression of agony, but this time it was my own face, distorted. I never made that expression. I never thought I was so distressed, but there it was in the picture. I decided to do some research. I went to the library and searched for anything related to the Fatal Frame game, or anything connected to curses or spirits. When I found some reports of other people who had experienced similar things after playing the game, my heart skipped a beat. They talked about ghostly figures appearing in photos, about a presence that followed them. But I didn't want to believe it. I just wanted to understand what was happening to me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake, looking at the photos, trying to find some rational explanation. When I closed my eyes, it felt like the images were still there, floating in my mind, like I was being watched all the time. Each click of the camera seemed to bring another presence closer to me, like the photos were opening a door to something that shouldn't be seen. When I finally decided to share it with a close friend, he stayed silent for a few seconds before suggesting I stop taking photos for a while. I nervously laughed, but he was serious. I didn't know if this was affecting me more psychologically or if something real was going on, but I didn't feel safe. I was starting to question my sanity. The figures in the photos weren't just some camera trick. They were there, showing up in all kinds of pictures in different situations. There was no ignoring it anymore. What happened next was even stranger. When I least expected it, I was in my living room, looking at one particular photo, when the figure that always appeared with that expression of agony, the woman with the contorted face, appeared in my doorway. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't see any shadows moving. But when I turned to look at the door, she was there, standing, as if she was watching me. I froze, and the figure disappeared the instant I blinked. There was nothing else, but I knew what I had seen. Today, the photos still appear on my camera, and the feeling that something is with me has never gone away. I don't know if this is a result of the game or if I'm losing my mind, but in some way, I know that something is very wrong. I can't pick up the camera and walk the streets like I used to because I know those images follow me. I can't explain it, and I don't think I'll ever understand what happened. All I know is that since that day, my life has never been the same. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like to support the community. And if you're not subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new content. See you next time.